President of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, received the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia, Sergei Lavrov. The cycle of hearings at the International Court of Justice over the legal consequences of the Israeli occupation of the West Bank, Gaza, and Jerusalem continues. Colombia and Cuba are among Wednesday's speakers. And meanwhile, in Palestine, an Israeli airstrike on the residential building in Deir al-Balah killed at least 25 people in the central Gaza Strip. Hello and welcome to From the South. My name is Belén de los Santos, and from the TeleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba, we begin with the news. The President of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, received the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia, Sergei Lavrov, in the framework of the strengthening of the ties of friendship and bilateral cooperation between Caracas and Moscow. Russia's highest diplomatic authority arrived at the Miraflores presidential palace, where he met with the Venezuelan president. The senior officials reaffirmed their willingness to strengthen the strategic and bilateral partnership of the two countries and stressed that both countries share a solid relationship based on friendship and solidarity. Lavrov and Maduro also discussed issues such as interaction in the international arena, including the regional and global situation, advocating the establishment of a multipolar world order, and upholding the principles of respect for sovereignty, territorial integrity, and equality among states. In this context, at a joint press conference between the foreign ministers of Venezuela and Russia, the head of Russian diplomacy stressed the stable level of strategic partnership with Venezuela, referring that it has become a truly friendship for more than 150 years. Lavrov indicated that both Moscow and Caracas coincide in a determination to achieve greater democracy in the international arena, while rejecting the blackmail and illegal sanctions of the United States and its allies. The Venezuelan Foreign Minister Iván Gil assured that this meeting would strengthen the friendship, solidarity, and cooperation between the nations that have a history of alliance and brotherhood in the face of adversity.
Venezuela is one of our closest and most trusted friends in Latin America and in the world in general. We are united by close strategic partnership relations that have a value in themselves and that don't suffer in the face of the international situation. We agree on important aspects of the international agenda based on the bonds of friendship between our peoples.
The Russian foreign minister said that the cooperation between Moscow and Caracas upholds the principles of the Charter of the United Nations.
We talked in detail about cooperation in the international arena. We agreed on the need to strive for justice and democratization of the international relations. The strict compliance with all the principles of the UN Charter in its entirety. We jointly stress the principle of respect for the unity of sovereign states without blackmail, without unilateral coercive measures by Washington and its satellites. And we consider that our cooperation on different international platforms is an important joint contribution for the creation of a more just and multipolar world.
For his part, the Venezuelan foreign minister Iván Gil reiterated that the relationship between Moscow and Caracas is of a strategic nature at all levels.
Venezuela and Russia have built a very important strategic relationship based not only on cooperation in the bilateral aspects mentioned by the foreign minister, which have to do with the energy, economic, and financial sectors, with sports, culture, tourism, industry, and agriculture, but also based on the fact that Russia and Venezuela also share principles in the international field.
Foreign Minister Iván Gil also pointed out that Venezuela has received support from Russia to move forward in spite of the sanctions applied by the United States.
Venezuela, with its moral, with its capacity, with the instructions of President Nicolas Maduro, we have found a way to move forward despite the sanctions. We have also seen how other countries, such as the Russian Federation, have also found that way. Those attacks have made us stronger, They are illegal, they are illegitimate, they must be lifted. They hurt us, but Venezuela has found a way to move forward with or without them.
We stay in Venezuela, where the president of the National Assembly, Jorge Rodriguez, denied the statements made by the opposition representative, Gerardo Blade, who claimed to avoid establishing meetings to prevent the media pressure. The head of the National Assembly reaffirmed that in addition to the meeting, several agreements have been signed in several cities of the national territory. Also, Rodriguez affirmed that members of the Venezuelan opposition have not stopped being afraid of the media, asserting that from now on the meetings will be held in Caracas in front of the different national and international media. Likewise, Jorge Rodriguez indicated that while the members of the United Platform attended the meetings convened, they were planning destabilizing acts against the country and were seeking to make an attempt against the life of President Nicolas Maduro and other high officials.
And yesterday, Blade said, I call him with name and surname because he lied, that he preferred to meet abroad as other meetings to avoid media pressure. That is a lie. During 8 months, we have met at least 14 times in the city of Caracas. The representatives of the Unitary Platform and the representatives of the Bolivarian government. Deny it, Mr. Gerardo Blade. It is false, without considering the countless times that I have met with all of them here in the city of Caracas. We have gone to other cities to sign agreements. They have acted as a kind of notaries or registrars in those cities at their request. We have had no problems in that sense. But to say that they cannot meet in the city of Caracas because journalists make them very nervous, it is not only a lie, it is a blatant nonsense.
In this context, Rodriguez also summoned all the sectors of the country next Monday to sign the document of the proposed electoral calendar that will be delivered to the National Electoral Council.
We want to make a formal call to all the sectors of the political, economic, and social life of Venezuela. Political, social, economic, cultural, religious, and academic. So that this document that the Drafting Commission has been working on in such a thorough and conscientious manner, we are already working on the 4th draft with all the ideas that have been expressed. With all the calendar proposals, with all the proposals for electoral guarantees, with all the proposals of electoral principles, and we have already made the decision to organize a broad discussion table for other topics, beyond the specifically presidential electoral issue.
Now let's take a short break, but remember you can join us on TikTok at TeleSUR English, where you will find news in different formats, news updates, and much more. Other stories coming up, stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. In the Netherlands, progresses are made in the cycle of hearings at the International Court of Justice on the legal consequences of the Israeli occupation on the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem. The judges of the organization continue to listen to arguments presented by the representatives of different countries. After 2 previous days where South Africa, Palestine, Bolivia, and other states presented their arguments against Tel Aviv's actions, This Wednesday is the turn of the ambassadors of Colombia and Cuba, among others. So far, the speakers have denounced the multiple and widely documented crimes of the Zionist government against the Palestinian civilian population, both in Gaza and the West Bank, since 1967. The 15-judge panel is asked to review Israel's occupation, settlement, and annexation, as well as policies aimed at altering the demographic composition, character, and status of the holy city of Jerusalem. Meanwhile, in Palestine on Wednesday, an Israeli airstrike on the residential building in Deir al-Balah killed at least 25 people in the central Gaza Strip. According to local media, among the victims of the bombings were 4 women and 4 children, and so far the number of wounded is unknown. It should be noted that also on Tuesday, 6 people were killed after an attack on a vehicle in the same locality. On the other hand, the health authorities denounced that in the last 24 hours, Israel committed 11 massacres, killing 118 civilians and wounding more than 163 locals. In this regard, Gazans warned that meanwhile hundreds of corpses remain in the streets and under the rubble. The Israeli army prevents rescue teams and residents from reaching them, while the latest overall death toll stands at 29,708 since October 7th. In Palestine, dozens of civilians were killed and others were injured this evening in Israeli strikes targeting several civilian homes in the Zaytun, southeast of Gaza City. According to local news media, the Israeli bombing targeted houses belonging to the families of Naim, Khalifa, Shenouda, and Yassin, which resulted in the killing and injury of scores of civilians. The majority of casualties are still trapped under the rubble of the houses and cannot be reached by civil defense vehicles and ambulances due to the intensity of fire by the occupation's warplanes, tanks, and drones. Israel continues its artillery bombardment against neighborhoods in the outskirts of Yuhaya in Gaza, which resulted in the injury of several civilians. In Gaza Strip, the World Health Organization, controlled by the Israeli army, is no longer functioning after weeks of a long siege, but in the facility still remains a number of patients in critical conditions. Our correspondent in the area, Noor Harasin, brings us all the details.
The World Health Organization managed to evacuate 18 patients from the Al-Nasser hospital and hospitalize them and transfer them to the Shuhada Al-Aqsa hospital, which is located in Deir al-Balah. They managed to do the same thing 2 days ago, evacuating 14 patients, and this brings the total of patients that were evacuated from the Al-Nasser hospital up to 32 patients. Some of them are with critical injuries, some of them with kidney failure, but still we are talking about more than 100 people who are still inside the hospital. Dr. Ashraf Al-Qudra, who is the spokesperson of the Palestinian Health Ministry, said that these people are in critical condition. They need to be transferred. The World Health Organization should be pressuring Israel into allowing these people outside of the hospital and allow the World Health Organization to evacuate the patients from the hospital. And this comes as the hospitals in Gaza are already suffering with the lack of medicine and medical supplies. So even the patients who were transferred outside of the Al-Nasser hospital, their lives are in danger because of the lack of medicine and because also to the continuous Israeli attacks around hospitals. Now we are talking about more than 15 main hospitals that shut down here in Gaza since the 7th of October, and we're talking about dozens of clinics and healthcare clinics that shut down due to the Israeli continuous attacks on the hospitals and the lack of medicine and medical supplies. And in the latest statement by the Palestinian Health Ministry, they said that the death toll in Gaza has reached 29,120 people. 70% of them are women and children. Noor Harazin, TeleSUR, Gaza.
In this context, the United States on Tuesday vetoed an Arab-backed UN resolution calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in the conflict between Israel and Hamas in the besieged Gaza Strip. The proposal, which received 13 votes in favor, with the United Kingdom abstaining, also rejected the forcibly displacement of the Palestinian civilian populations in violation of international law and demanded the immediate cessation of such violations and the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. It also called for unrestricted humanitarian access to and throughout the Gaza Strip. U.S. Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield insisted that approval of the Algerian proposal would jeopardize ongoing negotiations. This is the third time that the Security Council, whose resolutions are binding, has failed to reach a joint statement calling for a ceasefire in Gaza because of the U.S. veto. In other news, on Wednesday in Syria, at least 2 civilians were killed after a new attack by Israeli forces in a residential area of Damascus. In this regard, Syrian authorities reported that approximately at 9:40 a.m. local time, Israel launched an airstrike with several missiles from the direction of the occupied Syrian Golan and targeted a residential building in the Kafr Sousa neighborhood in Damascus. In this sense, the bombing caused the killing of 2 civilians in addition to material damage to the targeted building and some nearby buildings. On the other hand, Syrian authorities condemned that Israel systematically attacks Syrian territory in spite of numerous denunciations by Damascus before the UN Security Council, in which it points out that these actions infringe its sovereignty and threaten regional stability. We have now a final short break coming up, but before, we invite you to join our WhatsApp community for our English-speaking audience. You can scan the QR code on screen to join directly and also share the link to reach more people. Constant news coverage of Latin America and the Caribbean, as well as the rest of the world. Stay connected and informed with TeleSUR. Final short break. Don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. On Wednesday in Pakistan, the Pakistan Muslim League and the Pakistan People's Party confirmed the agreement to form a new coalition government in the country. Precisely, the agreement establishes the end of the political impasse in Pakistan, where the authorities will have until next February 29th to convene the first parliamentary session that will decide the new government. On the other hand, while these alliances are being forged, the Movement for the Justice Party of Pakistan continues with its campaign to recover the seats this party alleges belong to them after allegedly having manipulated the results of the elections in some regions of the country. In this way, allegations of electoral fraud were compounded when a senior official resigned from his post on Saturday after taking responsibility for the manipulation of election results in at least 5 districts in the province of Punjab. On Wednesday in India, police officers repressed with tear gas farmers marching to demand legal guarantees for their production. The farmers resumed the march after failing to achieve results they considered acceptable in the negotiations with the government. The sector is demanding an agreement that establishes favorable crop prices for products such as legumes, corn, and cotton for the next 5 years. Farmers trying to make their way to the Indian capital from the neighboring states of Punjab and Haryana have been pressing on the outskirts of the Indian capital for a week. However, police forces fired tear gas shells at the protesters as they tried to approach New Delhi. Thousands of Greek farmers also protested in Athens on Tuesday to demand financial aid, escalating a 4-week showdown with a government that says it has no more funds to help. According to local police, some 8,000 farmers took part in the protests, honking horns and waving Greek flags on dozens of tractors driven to the capital from across the country. The farmers began protesting last month, joining a wider movement that has seen roads blocked in France, Germany, Italy, Poland, and Spain, among other countries. Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis, on the other hand, said the demonstrations would be useful to persuade the European Union to change its agricultural policies. Greek discontent is partially fueled by anger at the slow pace of reconstruction after devastating floods in September in Thessaly, the center of Greece's agricultural production. Farmers want import controls, lower fuel taxes, better prices for products, and an easing of European Union environmental regulations. In Spain, the 31st Criminal Court of Madrid decreed the acquittal of José Manzaneda, coordinator of the digital media Cuba Información and of Euskadi Cuba. The sentence comes 4 days after a public hearing in Madrid in which Manzaneda and Euskadi Cuba were accused by the president of the association Prisoners Defenders, Javier Larrondo, considered a detractor of the Cuban government. The court in Madrid also ordered the head of the Prisoners Defenders to pay part of the cost for his recklessness and bad faith by maintaining that the accusation lacked grounds. In a settlement, the defense attorney recalled that the private prosecution was asking for 6 years in prison and a fine of 8,400 euros for the journalist. The criticisms of the so-called anti-Castro focused on the medical collaboration that the Cuban government carries out in several countries of the world. In Albania, opposition demonstrators protested violently outside the government building to demand the resignation of Prime Minister Edi Rama. Several protesters were arrested after some threw incendiary devices at a police cordon. The protest in Tyranny was organized by the Democratic Party of former Prime Minister Sali Berisha, who is currently serving a sentence of house arrest for corruption offenses. The protest was called on an anniversary of the fall of the communist government of Enver Hoxha on February 20, 1991. And the European Union extended for another year the unilateral sanctions applied by the bloc against Russia. Brussels renewed the 12 rounds of sanctions against Russia, which have been in place since February 2022 after the start of the special military operation. It also confirmed that it is studying the possibility of applying new sanctions against Moscow. The unilateral measures affect a range of sectors of the Russian economy and include trade embargoes, travel bans, and sanctions against Russian businessmen and officials. Despite these sanctions, in early February, Russian President Vladimir Putin announced that the country's economy would grow by up to 3.6%. And like this, we have come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, X, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For TeleSUR English, my name is Belén de los Santos. Thank you for watching.